Good day, everyone. On behalf of the Director of the Center for International and Defense Policy, Senator Hugh Siegel, and the staff, I would like to welcome Dr. Marzena Żakowska to the International and Defense Policy Speaker Series. Dr. Żakowska is an assistant professor at the National Security Faculty at the War Studies University in Warsaw, Poland. She holds a PhD in security science from the National Defense University, Warsaw, Poland. She is a director of the Global Affairs and Diplomacy Studies at National Security Faculty, War Studies University, and chair of War Studies Working Group at the International Society of Military Sciences. Professional associations include the Academy for International Conflict Management and Peacebuilding and the United States Institute of Peace in Washington. Dr. Żakowska is also a research fellow at the Royal Military College of Canada and the U.S. Army War College. As editor and author, she has published books and articles on the subject of armed conflict, hybrid threats, security, and social issues. Recently, she worked on a project, Modern War and Gray Zones, with Dr. David Lass from the Royal Military College of Canada, and a project, How Russia's Hybrid Warfare is Changing, with Dr. Larry Goodson from the U.S. Army War College. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Żakowska. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Howard Humes. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And I would like to say it was a great honor for me to be here. And I would like to thank you, Professor Howard Humes, for the invitation. Dear Professor, thank you one more time. Also, I would like to thank you, Professor David Lass and Professor Pierre Jocliouard from the Royal Military College of Canada, and express my gratitude for great support of my research dedicated to modern war and gray zone. Ladies and gentlemen, today I am going to talk about the Russia's hybrid warfare based on the analysis of the Russian intervention in Georgia in 2008 and Russian war in Ukraine that started in 2014. And please let me share my presentation with you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize the view which I'm going to present today regarding the Russia hybrid warfare is coming from the research on this topic and the research which I conduct with Professor Larry Goodson from U.S. Army War College. Professor is today with us. Dear Professor, thank you very much for your support, your knowledge, and all fruitful discussion during this process. And before I start, ladies and gentlemen, about the Russian hybrid warfare, please let me say a few words about the concept of the war, how we understand the war, how we understand the hybrid warfare, and also point few factors which are important when we're talking about the changed character of the war into the hybrid warfare. Going to the definition of the war, I would like to emphasize of the three very well-known theorists, strategists, scientists who bring the definition about the war and also mention how the concept of the war imply to the theory of the hybrid warfare. And first, we do have Sun Tzu, who said where the war is most important for the state, where when you fight, you should very well know, very well understand your opponent. And the most important, where the wagging the war is based on the use conventional and unconventional strategies, method, and tactics. Second very well-known theorist is the General Karl von Clausewitz, which he presents the concept of the war from the violent perspective, but also from the political point of view. From the violent perspective, he mentioned where the war is the act of force to compel our enemy to do our will, extremely important. Enemy to do our will. From the political point of view, war is the continuation of policy by other means. We observe this constantly. It doesn't matter what kind of form is of the war, but always coming with the continuation of policy by other means. And we also have the present researchers, which is Frank Hoffman, who is calling to be the father of the concept of hybrid warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, and Hoffman, he said, where the war is the combination of the kinetic and no military tools, what is most important, war is carried on by the actors, by the state actors and non-state actors, which of course use these tools on the full range and full scale. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also point out the touch which Professor Larry Goodson brings to the discussion regarding the hybrid war, and particularly the list which he made about the tactics which is used in the hybrid warfare. The list, as you may see, ladies and gentlemen, on the screen, well, let's be honest, is still open, as this is not end, not close of the list, because as we noticed the developing war in the Ukraine, we can be sure where the list is still open. But let me emphasize about something which is extremely important regarding the even recent development of the war in the Ukraine. Attack of the opponent economy, the attack of the cyber system, potential attack of the infrastructure, attack of the opponent government and election, the disinformation, misinformation, propaganda campaign, utilize agents, many forms of assassination, also using organizing crimes, networks, and using the proxies. What is the most important to be highlighted? The hybrid war can be endless. The hybrid war can be everywhere. Professor Larry Goodson also point out few main factors which change the character of the war and move the traditional understanding of the war toward the hybrid warfare. And he pointed out of the new dimension. We already know three main dimensions: land, maritime, and air. Now we have space and cyber, where he pointed on the nuclear weapons and the use of the nuclear weapons and as some possible measures where we working the hybrid warfare. Also the instrument of power, extend the DIM, globalization, effect on the globalization, on the change concept to the war, the increasing spending on the military expenditure, and particular the US military dominance, and the form how the state organized the policy, the interstate policy and the foreign policy, more by using the assumption, the concept on the realism, but also often implementing the nationalism approach. Ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about the war in waging by Russia, the war which Russia started in Georgia, and the war which Russia started and still carry on in the Ukraine, well, we're asking ourselves, what was the reason for Russia to start the war? During the discussion which we had with Professor also Professor Last and also Professor Larry Goodson, I came to the conclusion where the main reason for the war to start by Russia is the clash of the interests. And what kind of interests we have in mind? From one side, we do have the pro-Western foreign policy, which is present by the Georgia and the Ukraine. From the other side, we do have the Russia approach to the share of influence, and particular the Russia approach for own position in the post-Soviet war. And Russia, which see the pro-Western policy, the declaration, which represent Georgia and Ukraine to be part of European Union and NATO as major threats for their own dominance in the region. And the other very important part when we're talking about the clash of the interests is clash of the vision, how we understand the security, the state security, how we understand the position as the state position in the regional area or also in the global area. Global community. And here we have clash of the two concepts. From one side, we have the concept which represents Russia, which called Ruski Mir. From the other side, we have, of course, the West-style democracy with the very strong and transparent system of the state institution. Ladies and gentlemen, because the Ruski Mir is extremely important concept for Russia, concept based on how Russia developed their own state policy. I would like to just emphasize of the two important aspects of the concept to exactly give you some idea what this means. And at first, the concept explained the geopolitical position of Russia, also explained the aspect how Russia understands the share of influence in the Euro-Asia region, and also how understanding own position. And we're not talking about just their own position in the Europe or Euro-Asia, we're talking about their own position in the global perspective. And here, the central part of the concept is Russia as the center of the Slavic world. And what is exactly the Slavic world? I mean, the Slavic world we can describe as some form of the community which is unified by the same concept of culture, history, tradition, and of course the Russian language. Ladies and gentlemen, this concept is widely used. Probably you may notice by President Putin to justify his action against the Georgia and justified also his recent action against the Ukraine. And ladies and gentlemen, we can also point out the strategy which Russia used to mobilize the hybrid tools. We do have some discussion regarding the strategy with Professor Larry Goodson, and here is also the view which represents Professor Larry Goodson. Professor start from the events regarding the reject Russia Revolution and Orange Revolution. I will more go for discredit the West in the public opinion, and of course to do this to reverse the European and Euro-Atlantic agenda. Definitely we both agree on the using the radical nationalist and pro-Kremlin group to weaken the security of the states, to polarize the society. Also, the other aspect is portrayed the Ukraine and portrayed the Georgia as the state which have both many problems, economic problems, social problems, political problems, which for sure, even if we give them chance to be part of the West community, so be members of the European Union and NATO, that's how I understand, of course, the Russia, they will don't bring any good value to this community. And ladies and gentlemen, we should also point out the hybrid action, which we can recognize by analyze the behavior, by analyze many different forms of Russian action in both war, in the Georgia war and the Ukrainian war. What I have exactly in mind when I'm talking about the hybrid action, at first, they undermine the state sovereignty, how this goes, and Russia very wide implement the policy, the so-called borderization policy in Georgia. Russia organized voting, the referendum on the territory of the Ukraine. And this is, of course, self-organized voting. This is discrediting voting. And in order to build some ground for next step, which the next step is annexation of this territory. And ladies and gentlemen, it's extremely sad, but it's fact where from 2014, we may observe the progress in this action, how Russia annexed the territory of the Ukraine. And we very well remember 2014, March 2014, Russia started from annexation of Crimea and keep going with the next territory, recent formal annexation by the end of the September this year. This is annexation for others, territory for others region, then Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. The other hybrid action, which we can point by analyzing these two conflicts, is the militarization of this territory. Very interesting way how Russia operates to create social division based on promoting the traditional values which Russia connecting not just with Russian language and culture, but with the religion, the Orthodox Church, of course, and the preservation of the religion, the preservation of the culture, versus the West, which created and portrayed the West as the evil. And the other part is deepening the polarization by spreading the disinformation, by organizing many different forms of propaganda. Also, on the base days, encourage violence by supporting pro-Russian groups which operate directly in both countries. In Georgia is the party alliance and also some group called March. And in Ukraine, where we know where this is wide range of the separatist groups. And ladies and gentlemen, we both agree with Professor Larry Goodson, and actually this is the point of Professor Larry Goodson, which he represents the Russian way, how Russia get experience before start the, well, let's say, openly invasion in Ukraine, and how Russia get experience with using the hybrid tools and waging the hybrid war. Professor Goodson emphasized on the early stage, which he mentioned about the Afghan war, and after he pointed out on the Chechenia's, both Chechenia's wars. Of course, the preludium, great preludium before Russia started the war in Ukraine is the Georgia war, and here we have the wide open cyber war, which Russia test on the Georgia ground. But in the same time, we should also take some reflection on the war in Syria, and particular how in Syria, how Russia operates in Syria by using mercenaries and other military groups. Ladies and gentlemen, this is, of course, how we mentioned that hybrid warfare has include the military and non-military tools. Please also remember where the operation, the getting knowledge about hybrid warfare and how use these tools. This is also great knowledge how operate the leadership. And here we have some example about the Russian leadership, how they used previously before the conflict in Ukraine, the hybrid tools. And it's few examples, as you may, ladies and gentlemen, see, but the professor Larry Goodson emphasized and directly joined the professor view on assassination, many different forms of assassination, and also on sponsoring CAP in order to destroy the government, the legitimate government in the country. And as you probably notice here, we do have few forms of assassination. Russia, the most visible is start from 2006, and sponsoring military coup in Montenegro in 2016. The other more recent form of destruction is where no involvement by Russia in the democratic election in United States. Well, bring the example on 2016, 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, here we have the grand strategy. Professor Larry Goodson, he point strongly and emphasize on that where before Russia start war with the Ukraine, they operate on some level of strategy thinking, and I agree with that. So here we have some elements which in our view build the strategy. And first is the stop of NATO expansion. We're talking about, of course, the expansion on the east. We're talking about stop the expansion regarding, including for the NATO new members, Ukraine and Georgia. The ground for the strategy and understand the position of Russia in the world, which I already emphasized on that, but let's highlight one more time, is the concept of the Ruski Mir. Well, the main operation tool on the strategy is using the military and non-military ways, the measures. The some goal of the strategy to expand the Russian influence is the willing to control Black Sea and also to have some presence on the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, as well seek to warm water part. Ladies and gentlemen, military action and non-military action as the ground, as the operation tools for Russia. And here, let's bring the strategists, the Russian strategists, which he defined the military and non-military action. I'm talking about General Gerasimov, and of course we know his concept, so-called the Gerasimov doctrine. The doctrine formally doesn't exist, that's what I said, so-called. And however, what I would like to emphasize on the list of these tools of this action, and Military action, well, no, the strategic deterrence, the strategic deployment, conventional war, but I would like to highlight also of the two last two, peacekeeping operation and the threat of nuclear weapons. Very interesting, very important peacekeeping operation as Russia implement in the Georgia war, and the threat of nuclear weapons, which we're facing constantly from Mr. Putin in the last few months in the Ukrainian war. The non-military action were a wide range of the cyber operations, cyber attacks, information, disinformation, propaganda, also political and diplomatic pressures, economic pressure, economic sanction, using proxy, using all kind of different military formation as little green men, where what more? We're changing the political leadership, which we observe, for example, in the Ukraine war. Ladies and gentlemen, Russian hybrid war in Ukraine. Let's face this. It is complicated. Of course, it is complicated even when we analyze the war, because where the hybrid, so it's a lot combination of the non-military tactics, non-military measures used by Russia, and the last, hopefully last phase of the war, which Russia started in February this year. So this is regular military operation, full-scale invasion. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize on one thing where we're talking about the war and why Russia started the full-scale military operation in Ukraine. And we all know when Mr. Putin launched the invasion, he told the people, the Russian people, where the main goal of this invasion is demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. So here, please take a look on this combination on the military tools and non-military tools, which cover one action where the full-scale invasion, the goal of the one action, full-scale invasion. Well, very sadly, but let's see the main events, unfortunately main events for Ukraine as the independent state. So we do have the annexation of Crimea start. The invasion of Russia in Ukraine, this is March 2014, we do have the supporting by Russia declaration of independence, which proclaimed two regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk in April 2014. We do have the full-scale invasion, of course, which Russia started in February this year. And very sadly, finally, we have full-scale progress of annexation done by Russia in September this year. And the annexation include the four regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, where the question is, there will be end, or we should be ready to face something more? Well, so far, let's see what Russia faced and why the Russian intervention, why the present Russian intervention in Ukraine isn't going as Russia probably expect to be, because as we notice, Russian leadership and President Putin They was thinking we're starting war in Ukraine, there will be very quick military operation which ends successful. So why isn't like that? And first, we can point few factors which actually challenge the prospect of this operation. First of the factor is the failed assassination attempts of the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky. The second is the unexpected for Russia civil resistance in Ukraine. Also shocking probably for Russian leadership and for the president of Russia, Mr. Putin, the real condition of the Russian army were very unexpected probably for Russia the scale of military and humanitarian aid which Ukraine received from West country. Also very unexpected the sanction and the scale on sanction which the world, most of the world country put on Russia. And the last part also were probably unexpected for particularly Mr. Putin, the change to his approach as the leader, the global approach as his person, as the leader when the world discovered the mass grave in Ukraine. And following assassination, 2 minutes on that, we know there was few assassination on the President Zelensky carried by many different groups. One of the groups was the Chechenians, the other was Wagner groups, where some of the assassination was carried by the Russian agent too, where the main goal was, of course, remove the President Zelensky as the top leadership, and by that established by Russia own puppet government. Thanks to the God, this doesn't happen. Where Russia was surprised by the leadership, the strong leadership of the Ukraine. We're talking about the President Zelensky as the Ukrainian leader, and well, we may also notice on the graph where how strong is support the Ukrainian citizens for President Zelensky policy, for President Zelensky action, and the way how he defend own country. Where one of the form to increase the positive result of all action regarding the defense of the Ukraine was created by President Zelensky, the international region of Ukraine. Very important aspect regarding the resilience and defense part. We're talking about the resistance and how the Ukrainian citizens also approach to the conflict. I mean, we have in mind, well, large positive approach and response to the mobilization call, which was organized by Ukrainian government, and many of the Ukrainian people just participate in organizing for the civilians training by the volunteers and also by the veterans, how hold the guns, how fight, and how defense themselves. And regarding the defense part, please also take a look at the form of defense which the Ukrainian people choose. One of the form is to prepare the cocktail of Molotovs, and by this, using the cocktails to fend the Russian army. The instruction, how organize, how prepare this kind of cocktail was posed by the ministry, Ukrainian Ministry of the many form communication, social media, for example, on the Twitters. Russian army, yes, Russian army. When we're talking about Russian army, we can point out where the problems which Russian army face and still facing, and this why Russian army is losing on the battlefield. And first with this hostile equipment, also problem with the command, lack of this consistency regarding the strategy, the tactical level, the shoulders of soldiers, low morale in the army, and the most important problem with Russian leadership facing recently, last few months, this is the chaos of the mobilization process in Russian army. Well, here, good things for Ukraine. This is the support which West country, which Ukraine receives from the West country. And we do have here some example of the military support from where United States, from Germany, from Norway, from Great Britain, from France, and the support including light weapons, ammunition, artillery, and also anti-craft system too. Because, well, I'm Polish, so please forgive me if I may say, but I will also present some examples of the support with Polish army passed to the Ukraine, and this is also hundreds of light weapons, ammunition, and anti-craft missile systems too. Ladies and gentlemen, next strong support, world support for Ukraine, world support who disagree with the policy which Russia presents, disagree with the carried by Russia invasion. Of course, this is sanction, and sanction which European Union, Canada, United States, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea impose on Russia. But from the other hand, we have also some countries who are allies for Russia, who were giving Russia support and don't show any disagreement with the policy which Russia carry on. And here we have Belarus, we not have to comment on that, but we do have Syria, we have Iran, the natural position which took, for example, Brazil, India, or China. But going with the sanction, here we have the UN sanction on Russia. And ladies and gentlemen, this is on this slide, you may see the variety of the sanction which EU put on Russia. And we have many restrictions, individual sanction. We have the restriction on the economic cooperation. We have restriction on media, the diplomatic sanction, restriction on visa used. This is not the end. And we have the economic sanctions which were implemented on the many different sectors of economy, for example, finance, technology, energy, transport, defense, and trade. What is the most important part that European Union put a new sanction after Russia annexed the 4 regions of Ukraine? European Union put next packet, the so-called 8 packet of sanction. In this packet, import bans, European Union bans import to Russia, which is worth $7 billion, also put a restriction or export, particularly the export which is touching the military supplies for Russian army, where just to stop the progress on development by Russia, the war in the Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, are the sanction works? This is a good question. This is a question which always came during the discussion regarding the situation in Ukraine and regarding the relation and policy which West present toward the Ukraine and toward Russia. Well, this which we have here, a few different graphs, show what actually where the sanction works. And this is estimation which is presented by OECD, by International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. And based on this estimation, we may see where in 2022, so in this year, for sure, Russia survived a huge drop of GDP. Also, the imports will drop, the export drop. Also, the inflation rise sharply. Also, the index of Moscow exchange drop too. So by this estimation, by this what we may see on this graphs, we may say, well, yes, the sanction which the world, the sanction which the European Union put on Russia definitely works. Mass grave, ladies and gentlemen, well, we should emphasize on that because the discovery of mass graves in the Ukraine shake public opinion, shake the global opinion, and also definitely change the view, the perspective which we look at on the leader, the Russian leader, Mr. Putin. And well, some example of how the view is changed, how now we look at on the Mr. Putin is the present stance which mentioned President of United States, Joe Biden, which he called for the war crime trial against Russian president. And also he asked the United Nations General Assembly to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. As no doubts, I don't not have any doubts that President Putin should face war crime when the war will be end. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine, as we may notice, very well prevailed in gaining the war. In defense the country, that's how I should say, in defense the country against Russian invasion. And why? Because we may also notice the strong support from NATO and West. And as Professor Larry Goodson say, we should emphasize where NATO and West have used hybrid measure better than Russia. And Professor Goodson point out what we exactly should have in mind. We should have few actions. The first action, this is announcing a Russian invasion plan before it occurs. The other action, this is providing for Russia substantial military equipment, substantial support, ongoing support. We're still implementing significant economic pressure. We're talking about the sanction, economic sanction, but also we're talking about the cultural sanction, which quite but help to stop the Russian propaganda and disinformation. And also keeping NATO together, keeping NATO together and showing the unity among NATO countries by adding the new members, which is Finland and Sweden. Recent development, current development, ladies and gentlemen. At first, what we notice when we analyze the development how Russia carried the war against Ukraine. The first is the chaos of mobilization process, which the mobilization process sparks many protests in Russia. The second is even more important part, running out of the supplies and ammunition in Russian army. Well, so Russia is losing on the battlefield. Yes, as you ladies and gentlemen may see, a few points from the days of the battle start from March this year and ending recently in the November. We may see where Russia is losing on the battlefield, and some sparkling and good news for the Ukrainian people and for the world too. It was the liberation of the Kherson city and withdrawal of Russian troops from the region. Well, but still we have the question, so what will be next? Are we, because of the loss which Russia already had on the battlefield and still is losing, are we close to end of the war? Well, let's take a look for the option which still Russia has, what kind of measure still Russia can use. And we start this discussion, ladies and gentlemen, during the ESMS conference, International Society of Military Science conference, which took place in Lisbon in October this year. And during this conference, previously based on the discussion which I had with Professor Larry Goodson, we point out with professors some measures which Russia can still use. One of the measures was the blows of the Ukrainian civil infrastructures. The other measure was use the nuclear weapon. Another used by Russia the economic sanction against Western country. We're talking about the limiting the energy export in the winter. Were continuing of mobilization in Russia. There was the option, that's how I say, which was present in October. Particular, I'm not sure where we have still the option on the table as valuable as far as what we observed regarding the mobilization outcome of the mobilization process in Russia. But definitely the attempt to escalate the food crisis, and what is more important, shifting to hybrid measures against the Ukraine and NATO country. What kind of hybrid measure we have at first to consider? Definitely the first flag operation, the cyber attack, and the civil unrest. So this is no conclusion. It's no conclusion from my side to this topic, but it is the great question. And this is the great question also for you, ladies and gentlemen. So what next? What next based on the current development of the situation in this war in the Ukraine? Well, we're facing from one side, Russia is losing. From the other side, we observe the increasing anti-West narrative, which is presented by Russian leadership, hostility narrative, which is presented by Russian leadership, and where, for example, the president of Russia, Mr. Putin, calling West as open satanism. This is really something to be considered. And from the other side, we do have Ukraine as the nation, as the country, as the still independent country who is fighting, strongly fighting the invasion. And the question is where, because of the current situation with the Russian army, that President Zelensky is ready to compromise something and end the war too. But most important is definitely what we should consider, what will be the global stance regarding the end of the war in Ukraine, which we know where the G20 were taking still place in the Indonesia, and the recent development which we have, the NATO stance, where today on the Polish ground we field Russian-made missiles. So the situation getting really, really complicated. The situation getting really, really complicated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I leave this question for our discussion, and I am here ready for your question, your comments. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, you can probably hear a dog barking in the background. I'll work through that for a moment. So we have a question and answer function. If you can place any questions you may have in the few minutes we have left. I actually will start off with a question, Dr. Żakowska. Right now, one of the challenges with hybrid warfare is that there's no agreed upon definition or doctrine. Does that remain true?
I do agree, where we don't have the one stance regarding this, how we understand the hybrid warfare. Yes. Well, from my perspective, the most important is to keep in mind where hybrid warfare is the use many different tools, and this is use of the conventional and unconventional tools. Yes. And where also we should keep in mind where the hybrid warfare is not just about states, it's about many different actors, and state actors and non-state actors. So technically, based on the situation in the Ukraine, we should be extremely aware of using the non-conventional tools by non-state actors in war, in the modern war. Yes, because we when we analyze the war, we used to get to understand how operate the conventional tools, but technically we push back the aspect of using non-conventional tools, and hybrid warfare showing where the non-conventional tools is extremely important in this so-called game. I'm not sure that I answer your question, but I'm trying my best.
I think you did. Another follow-up. Right now, you've explained very well the challenges posed by Russia and the invasion of Ukraine. I had the impression in your presentation that you see Russia's hybrid warfare capability or willingness to use hybrid warfare to be more extreme now than ever has been before. Is that a correct interpretation?
Well, it is correct interpretation because when we analyze the previous warfare, the previous war which Russia participated, well, at least doesn't came when important threats, for example, using the nuclear weapons, and based on the Gerasimov concept of the conventional and non-conventional tools, which is the ground for strategy and tactical operation, well, we may see where, of course, Gerasimov point out where the nuclear weapons is one of the options, the military option. This option doesn't came out, for example, when Russia waging the war in Georgia. But as we all notice, this threat is constantly rising by Mr. Putin since good few months in Ukraine. We hope where this is just threat, but still we have to understand where this is one of the tool which can be used as the weapon, yes, in this war.
Thank you very much. One of the questions we've received is, are Western states capable of carrying out hybrid operations? Do they possess the resources and the will?
To carry hybrid operations? Well, if we're talking about Western state and carry the hybrid operation, well, technically we're talking about the NATO. This is my understanding on carry on operation, military operation, yes. Well, there's no doubt where NATO for sure has resources to carry operation. Well, the question is how NATO decides to operate, yes. But from my perspective, I don't have doubts where NATO have resources to carry operation. Where the most important part is to stop Russian hybrid operation. So we should focus on that, yes. We should focus on this to stop the war which is ongoing and in Ukraine and the war which Russia started in Ukraine.
Okay. Thank you. And we actually have time for one more question, and we received one from Dr. Rob Williams at Royal Military College Canada. His question is, the Russians are reactive in the responses to tactics in Ukraine. Do we credit them with knowing what option they will use next when it doesn't work? Or is it random or haphazard? The Russian chess grandmasters plan ahead. With respect to the treatment of prisoners of war, do we have a sense as to whether the victims of Starobilsk, buried in the Pentanchivka region near Charkov, have had their graves disturbed? So I guess there's two questions in there. Are the Russians really planning or just reacting? And then with respect to, and then the question about prisoners of war and victims.
Prisoners of war, okay. Are the Russians really planning or just reacting? In my view, the beginning of the operation for sure was planning. The beginning of the invasion for sure was planning. Probably the recent month, the development of the battlefield brings some challenge for Russia. So I don't see too much planning here. The recent development showing maybe they reacting, yes. But, well, who knows? Who knows what is the truth? Yes, who knows how the Russia operate? But I will don't exclude either option. I think where the Russia try, to adjust themselves very in very clever way, yes, depends on the situation, yes. But definitely the recent development, from my view, doesn't show planning. It's more showing like they reacting. And the second question, the prisons of war and what we should do with the prisons of war, yes. This is what I understand as far as the Russian prisoners of war, what we should do with them, yes. This is prisoners of war, and where is international law, and we should definitely respect the rights of prisoners of war according to international law. The international law very well describe how treat prisoners of war, and it doesn't matter the nationality where this is the prisoners of war has Russian nationality, Ukrainian nationality, it doesn't matter. This is prisoner of war, and is law, is international law. In the international law, we have rules how to treat the prisoners of war, and we should follow definitely that. We should follow that.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. I don't think I can. Oh, wait, I can. I am bringing up your presentation again. So if there are further questions, to please email you at this address. Dr. Żakowska, I want to thank you for joining us here today and for an opportunity to hear about your research and your perspectives on the evolving conflict and the role of hybrid warfare in Eastern Europe at this time. And I think for me and for others in the audience, that this was extremely important as we formulate our own research perspectives on concepts of hybrid warfare and, of course, relatedly, gray zone conflict. And I personally, and I think I echo the others in the virtual space, found this incredibly valuable, and it's going to help me refine some ideas I'm currently writing about. So on behalf of everybody who's joined us today, and again, CIDP, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Hume. And one more time, I would like to say thank you very much for having me here. It was great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to share the touch, share the research outcome. And one more time, I would like to emphasize where the research is carried with very good cooperation with Professor Larry Goodson. I would like to thank you, Professor Goodson, too. And I would like to thank you also, Professor David Last. Thank you, Professor David Last, to showing the understanding of war. Thank you.
Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.